Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session
with your host, Michael Rearden.
Welcome, Corinne Auman, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're going to be talking about your work. Of course, you have a long bio, psychologist, author of the book Keenagers. We're going to be talking about pain point, age, all of these things in a nutshell. What I love for guests to do is to give their own bio, because if there's anyone who knows you, it's yourself. So if you could tell the world who you are, what you do, and how you help, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So my background is in psychology, as you mentioned. I'm a developmental psychologist, and I specialize in adulthood and aging. And so I've taught for many years in psychology and gerontology programs. And then I also run a care management business where I help families figure out how to navigate care for their aging loved ones, because it's very complex, and most of us tend not to think about it until we're kind of in that oh crap moment and we have to figure everything out really quickly. So those things, teaching, working in care management. And then as part of that, I recently wrote a book, Keenagers with a K, as you mentioned, which is about telling a new story about aging. Because what I see in my work is that the negative stereotypes, the negative story that we have around aging is actually one of the things that keeps people from planning for their older adulthood, planning for those years to figure out what they want and how they want it and how they're going to pay for it and all those things. That leads to poor outcomes when we just kind of bury our heads in the sand. And there is actually a lot to look forward to as we grow older. People today get an extra decade of life compared to previous generations. So that's a blessing. And we need to think about those years as a blessing, not a, oh God, I don't want to have that happen. Heaven forbid, I grow older. So changing how we look at it and how we're thinking about it will help us actually make the most of that time. And so those are all the things I spend my time doing. I also have four kids at home. I have 4 teenagers. So I'm also busy being the prefrontal cortex for 4 people who do not have one yet. And that is quite tiring as well.
Yes, I can imagine. One of the questions I want to lead off with is probably the $1 million question today, and then we're going to get into the other $100,000 questions is age just a number?
Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, we have an extra decade of time that previous generations didn't get. And just to put that into perspective for you, when Social Security was first put into place in the 1930s, you got Social Security at 65. The average American lifespan was 67. So we were expecting you to live, a couple of years. Now the average American lifespan is 76. So you're getting an extra decade on average. And a lot of people are living well into their 80s, 90s, and beyond. And so that time period is something we just haven't had before. And what it also has meant is we're living healthier, longer. And so what 65 is today or what 75 is today is not the same as it was for your parents or your grandparents before them. So many people are reaching these ages still going, hey, I've got energy and I want to be productive and I want to be doing stuff. Like, I'm not done. I don't want to just go sit in my rocking chair on my front porch or watch TV all day. And so the number itself really means almost nothing. If you have met one 75-year-old, you have met one 75-year-old, because there is enormous diversity in the older adult population. And so we cannot just put people in a box and say, oh, well, you're this number. And so that automatically means you have a bunch of diseases and you aren't doing anything productive and, or whatever our stereotypes are about that age. The number really means nothing. It's all about how healthy you are, how active you are, what are you doing with your life at that point?
Yeah, when I go to the gym, I see people who are well in their 60s and 70s. And one of the guys at the gym, he moved, but he was like 67 years old. He was in better shape than me. I was like, Jesus, I was like 34 or something when I met him at the time. He was just like a go-getter. He was just like, I'm all about fitness. He was healthy. He walked or ran a mile or two every single day. It's just like that was his lifestyle. And we give ourselves a lifestyle typically of fast food, like when we hit a certain age, of fast food, because we're so career focused and just being busy, busy, busy until we get the doctor's note. And then we're like, okay, let's start to pay attention. Very similar to retirement, where people don't necessarily focus on their retirement. They're not putting money in the Roth IRAs, 1Ks, etc. And then when it's close to retirement, they're like, oh, wait, I have no money. I spend it on Starbucks or something. So now they're in a mad sprint to try to make ends meet. And some never ever get the chance to retire because they have to continually work. In a sense, that could be a good thing because they are just giving themselves a purpose now rather than at 65. All right, I'm going to go sit in the rocking chair, as you said. Some people fail to give themselves a purpose, which is essential when they're trying to have longevity.
Absolutely.
Typically, when you're like older, you get grandbabies, and that right there is purpose in a nutshell, too. So you're like, I got my grandbabies, I got to take care of them. I got to take them to the stores and everything. I got to give them candy before I give them back to their parents. This is the joy of grandparenting.
You make a really good point there. Like, whatever your purpose is, it's what gets you out of bed on a Wednesday morning while you're in those retirement years. And I'm putting that in quotes, but it can be work. It doesn't have to be work. It might be your grandchildren. It might be caregiving for somebody else. It might be volunteering. Who knows what it's going to be, but it's the thing that gives you purpose and meaning in whatever form that is.
hmm Well, going off to my question of what I wanted to say was, what is the mindset of age? Because as I was saying, the gentleman in the gym, the person who's older with grandkids, they don't necessarily say that, oh, I'm old and I'm decrepit and I can't run around and I can't do the things that I used to do. It's definitely a different way of thinking than the person who's 40 saying, oh, my back hurt, my knees hurt. I can tell when it's going to rain. It's a very different type of mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're really talking about having a positive outlook on aging versus having a very negative outlook on aging. And there, first of all, if you have a negative outlook on aging and you're hearing this conversation and you're going, oh man, I really should have, don't beat yourself up. Like if that's the way you've been thinking, because we are in a very ageist society, right? We hear old age jokes all the time. We hear all these stereotypes and people say negative things about older people all the time. So you've kind of grown up in this culture. So if you have caught yourself thinking or saying these things, even just in your own head, now's the time to take notice and go, huh, why am I talking to myself that way? Maybe there's a better way to do this. And there's actually some really good research by Dr. Becca Levy up at the Yale School of Public Health. And she looks at specifically how your outlook or your attitude about aging impacts how you actually age. One of her most famous studies shows that more people with a positive aging outlook, a positive attitude about aging, live on average 7.5 years longer than people with a negative outlook about aging. And that makes sense. You can kind of imagine that guy at the gym that you're seeing, he's got a positive outlook about aging. He's taking care of himself. He's exercising. He probably goes to all his doctor's appointments and gets his checkups and is doing things because he's looking forward to all this time and he wants to be healthy and active during that. And when we have a more negative outlook, it's much easier to just kind of go, woe is me. And well, it doesn't really, I'll eat the fast food because what does it matter? I'm just going to get old and decrepit anyway. It really does change not only how you think, but also the behaviors that come out of that, based on whether or not you've got a positive outlook about it. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book. The subtitle of my book is Telling a New Story About Aging. The whole point of that is that I've got a bunch of interviews with people like your guy from the gym, Keenagers, as I call them. And the whole point of that is to say, hey, let me tell you a bunch of stories about people who are doing this well. And they're way more common than you think they are. I mean, I think sometimes like on the news or something, they'll profile an older person and they'll kind of make it seem like this is some sort of super senior, like there's some sort of an outlier or anomaly. And my point is, this is actually way more common than you think. We have a lot of older people who are aging really well. And you can do it too if you can just kind of start reshaping how you're thinking about this in your own head so that you are planning and preparing appropriately.
The average human mind definitely loves to see things that are plausible. So they see it and they can say, okay, it's tangible. Well, so I can do it. Roger Bannister, I talk about the story all the time, 4 Minute Mile, right? No one thought he couldn't do it. He finally did it. I think it was in the like 2 weeks, like 9 people did it or something like that. So it's like, what happened in the time span of, oh, you can't do this to now you can do it, right? It's basically how you think. So
it's
if
mental.
so if we can look at aging more so as a opportunity, right? So we become more seasoned. Like, I don't know if you ever had food that wasn't seasoned. I don't like it. But if you can get to in aging, it's the same way. It's like you have all of this wisdom. I love learning from older people, mentors. I call the old guys at the gym pops, but apparently they don't like to be called pops. They like to be called uncle or something because it makes them feel young. So it's either pops or uncle. I still call them pops unless they correct me, and then I'll call them uncle or something. But going on to the book, Keenagers, the stories are so powerful because, it just gives more insight to people. But then a story can have also a negative effect, right? Because not so much of the stories that you selected for the book, but someone can look at perception or their own story in their life or someone else's life, and they can say, well, this is my reality. We could look at a nursing home, for example, and the majority of the residents in the nursing home, they're older. They might need help. They might need some assistance. So maybe the people working there, CNAs, the nurses, LPNs, RNs, are going to say, this is what's going to happen when I'm older. How can people protect themselves from scenarios and situations like that?
How can they protect themselves from being in the nursing home? Or no, from
You definitely can do that way too.
Yeah.
But more so of the idea of this is life when I get a certain age.
Sure. So I think your point about role models, like seeing the guys at the gym, searching out your own role models, like who are going to be your aging mentors, the people that you are looking at what they're doing and going, okay, that is the future I want, right? Like I want to be like that guy at the gym. And it can be your mentors for how to age can be people that you know specifically in your day-to-day life. Maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's, an aunt or an uncle, but it may also be, just people who are famous. Anybody that you have watched age and age well, even that phrase, aging well, that's going to be very specific to you. So, for example, one of my mentors, I think, is Betty White because, she lived a really long time. She lived to almost 100. But what I really, really love about her is how positive she always was. She was so funny and so positive and always like doing all kinds of good stuff for animal charities and things like that. And I just think if I could live that long with that positive of a spirit, I mean, she was working. She actually really didn't come into her full career, like really get hit shows and things like that until she was in her 50s. So she really hit her stride in her 50s and then worked almost all the way till the very end. Great. That's who I want to be, right? Somebody who I'm going to be 50 this year. I want to hit my stride right now and just go straight on being productive, doing things I care about and that make me happy from now all the way to the end. Finding people like that, either that you know personally or that you see in the world, that you can kind of go, that looks like an older adulthood I would want to have. And what are they doing? How do I model my life after that as much as possible?
Yeah, that's a very good point because I know when it comes to mentors, people think of like business mentors, but not so much of like life mentors. Like I want to be like you when I grow up. And I know this can happen with with kids and they look at their parents or something along those lines and they say, I want to be like mom, I want to be like dad. Maybe they have a friend's dad. I'm not sure if you know the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So it's like you look at maybe someone else's situation. You say, you know what, this is definitely the path that I would like to take. And I think when it comes to, being young, we're so quick to want to grow up. So your teenagers right now, they're probably saying, Mom, I want to go drive. Mom, can I borrow the car? And you're like, oh my goodness, now I have all these other worries I need to be looking at, right? Like, are they going to be okay? Are they going to be speeding? Are they going to be hanging out with the wrong crowd? Who knows the plethora of things that they want to experience that they don't know yet. And as you said, you are their prefrontal cortex right now because they are, still developing. And they're going to hit a point when they are 21, or maybe they are in their 30s and they're starting to have maybe a family if they don't have them sooner, of course. And now their views of life change. And I wanted to get into the aspect of the seasons of life, because with aging, when we're teens, we think very different than we're in our 30s and our 40s and our 50s, et cetera, right? Because our priorities change. Do you think those circumstances have a detrimental effect on aging? For example, climbing the corporate ladder, right? You might spend 10, 20, 30 years becoming a CEO if you were working up at a Fortune 500 company or something along those lines. And you finally attain this monumental goal that you envisioned for yourself, only to look back at, where did the time go? I was so focused on building this company, building my career, that I neglected my family, my kids, my health, etc. So it seems like our focus can sometimes be maybe more at the materialistic things or the things that are not going to give us longevity later on in the future.
I think this is a fundamental problem for every human, right? Like, I'm trying to build this life. I'm trying to build this career. I'm trying to work this job to provide for these kids, while also, I'm missing, the kids because,
Yeah.
I'm doing this podcast with you at 4:00 on a Thursday, and my kids are all out of school today and they're at home, and I could be doing things with them. And instead I'm here. And, that kind of balance that every person is trying to work through over the course of your lifespan. I will say the interesting research I'd like to share with you is something about called the U curve of happiness. And it shows, this is some research out of Stanford, and it shows that when people are in their 20s, early teens, early 20s, they're pretty happy. And then you get into midlife and you get that job and the career and the teenagers and the stress associated with it. And your happiness tends to dip. People tend to be their most unhappy in their 40s, 50s. And then as you get into your 60s and 70s, we actually have what we would call peak happiness. People report the highest levels of happiness in older adulthood. But part of that is related to how they reflect back on their life and what they accomplished, what they did. Like, am I looking back at my life and going, yeah, I did good and I accomplished the things I wanted to do? Or am I looking back at my life with a lot of regrets? So, I think we have a lot to look forward to as we grow older, in terms of happiness. Have that stereotype about that older people are all depressed and sad is absolutely not true. But there is this issue of, all throughout your life, no matter how old you are, you have to figure out how to balance, those goals and those things you're trying to achieve with your relationships in your life. There was something I heard the other day that was talking about, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it was basically like your eulogy, that at your eulogy, nobody's going to list your career achievements at your eulogy. They're going to talk about your family and your relationships at your eulogy. So you have to kind of always keep that in the back of your mind, what's going to be said, those relationships and the balance of that with the things that I do want to accomplish professionally.
Yeah, very much. I know, I know something also with the gravestone is like loving father, loving husband is not so much of podcast host or CEO of Apple. It's
right.
It's more so of the, what would you like to be remembered for? And I don't think there's many people who even sit down to think about what they want to do later on in life. Like, I know people, they have this idea of what they would like to do. They would like to retire early, be financially free. The younger generation, the FIRE movement, they maybe want to travel the world. They want to do all of these wonderful things, but yet they don't necessarily give themselves the avenue or the plan for it. It's almost like, I'll do it later. They give themselves this idea of procrastination that they have time. And I do want to get into that question of time because tomorrow's not promised, right? I can go out and drive and God forbid something happens and I'm not making it home, right? And I had all of these envisions for later on in life and thinking about my family growing up and my grandkids, and all of that is going to be ripped away. And if we give ourselves I guess you can say, the focus of life, where life is always fleeting, because in a sense, we're always in company with both life and death. And many people are just always clinging on to the life and they don't necessarily focus on the death aspect because maybe it's scary. Maybe it's something that, is very traumatic for them because they lost a loved one, a mom, a dad, someone, and they don't want to look at older age. So then they find themselves in turmoil later on because A, they might not have been taking care of themselves, or B, they're not ready for adulthood or elderly age.
Mm-hmm. The thing that working as a care manager has really shown me, and I think this will give people hope, is how resilient we are. As human beings, I think it's very easy for us when we are younger to look at older adulthood. And I mean, like, let's be honest, my teenagers are looking at me and going, oh my gosh, I don't want to age. I don't want to be that age. We look at people who are older and maybe who do have some health conditions and things like that. And we go, that would be awful. I would never want to live like that. How terrible. And what I really see so clearly in my care management practice is how resilient people are and how adaptable we are as human beings. First of all, old age is happening to all of us. We are all old people in training, right? We're older at the end of this podcast than we were at the beginning. And so the changes that come with age, they come on slowly, right? They creep up on us over time. So it's not like one day you just wake up and all of a sudden you're old. Whatever that means. Old is always 10 years older than however old you are right now. That's what people always say. Even people that I've worked with who have significant health problems and are maybe in a nursing home, like you were just saying. We have a client right now who is in a nursing home, and we had a care plan meeting for him this morning, and he was cracking jokes and flirting with the nurses. I mean, he's in what you and I might look at and be like, oh, that's awful, right? Like he's got to live in the nursing home and he's not going to get better and go home. And that's true. And yet his attitude about it is so positive, and he's making all the people around him laugh and have a good time. And, that's a choice. That's a choice that we get to make. That adaptability is something we all have. And that is really it gives me such hope about my future, that no matter what really happens to me as I get older, I get to choose my attitude, my mood right now. Like you just said, all we have is right now. I can be cranky and awful about it and make everybody around me miserable, or I can be the person who's joking and having a good time and making everybody around me smile as well. That's up to you who you choose to be in that moment.
Yeah, very true. I worked in a nursing home from high school to college, 6 years total. And I started off just in the recreation department, and then I got a job working in the kitchen, dietary aid stuff. And I got to see firsthand people that were there the whole 6 years that I was there. And some were good, some were bad, right? Some were just so happy, and some, eventually they just started to have the walls cave in on them because maybe their family stopped showing up all the time. And they were basically just saw the same nurses, and it seemed like maybe people didn't care about them because, they still had family. And I do want to get into the conversation of care management for our elderly parents and aging loved ones, because it is something that I don't think many people want to think about. I don't want to think about my mom when she's old and she can't walk and I have to take care of her. I don't want to think about my dad when he can't walk and I have to take care of him. Like, most people don't want to see the people that they idolize eventually, become almost a lesser version. If we just looked at it from like a mindset type of thing, it's like, oh, you used to be able to walk, now you can't. Now, of course, we have to understand with age, again, there's beauty. And the way I think of it as, I have a kid, he's 2, or I have kids, and they are very slow when I'm walking. I like walking fast. I'm tall, I'm 6'4". I have a long stride. So I have to purposely walk his stride when I'm holding his hand. Not a problem, right? And then it's so interesting because I remember, because when my great grandmother was alive, I had to match her stride. And so it was an awakening experience for me to realize the similarities from being such a young age to being an elderly age. It's almost like that riddle is like, what crawls on 4 legs, then 2 legs, and then 3? It's a human. It's basically you walk on 4, your hands and your feet, you're crawling, and then you walk on 2 feet, and then you walk with a cane at the end of life. It could be difficult for people to say, well, you should keep up with me, or that, like, I can't be bothered taking care of you because I'm so worried about my life. How can people care, or how can people start to look at the care for their parents and how they should go about it? Should they put them in a nursing home? Should they do home care, like have them at their house, take care of them, maybe get them a CNA for their home or whatever? What are the options for people?
So there are a myriad of many different options that you could possibly do for folks. It's going to vary from family to family, right? I think the very first thing that people should be doing is having the conversation, right? Having the conversation with the people in your life who you are either potentially going to care for or that are going to care for you, and saying, hey, this is what I would like, right? I would like to try to stay at home as long as possible and maybe bring in home care. Maybe we need to remodel the house, so make sure it's senior friendly, right? That I've got grab bars in the bathrooms and things like that. And if I want to stay at home, then I need to be thinking about doing those renovations, making sure that I'm planning for the price of home care, things like that, years in advance, years in advance. What too many people do is wait until they need home care right now,
Mhm.
and they would like to stay at home, but they're in a house with no master bedroom on the first floor. It's got a huge flight of stairs. The house is not senior friendly in any way. So you need to be thinking about that ahead of time and having conversations with your loved ones about, this is what I would like. Now, if you think, no, I don't really want to stay at home, I'd rather be in a community, or maybe I'm going to move closer to my kids, right? Wherever they are. People should shop around for senior communities, again, ahead of time. What happens in my field of work is I get a phone call and the story goes something like, mom was at home, everything was fine until fill in the blank, something has happened. And now we need to know everything about all the different retirement communities that are available. There's that pretty place I drive by on that road. That one looks good. Well, that one is the completely wrong level of care for that individual, right? Like, families don't know. They don't know what the different levels of care are. They don't know what they cost. They don't understand that Medicare does not pay for long-term care. And so they have not budgeted financially for these
Mhm.
things. And there's this sort of panic that happens in that moment because everybody has just kind of gone along, just like you said, and gone, I don't really want to think about mom and dad ever having to need that. And if I don't think about it, then that means it just won't happen.
Mhm.
And then there's that moment where I get the phone call and they're panicked because I'm having to tell them a whole bunch of stuff all at once. And a lot of it is not good information. What do you mean Medicare doesn't pay for any of this? That sort of stuff. And so you've got to have the conversation. We are all aging. It is inescapable. No matter how many ads you see for face creams that say, win the battle against aging, none of us are going to win this. We are all going to age. And so preparing for it is a way to empower yourself to get the kind of care you want, to be sure that you can care for your loved ones in the way they want, to make sure we're all on the same page about what we want to have happen all along the way. The one caution I will give you is if in these conversations, you should never say to someone, promise me you'll never put me in one of those places, or promise me you'll never put me in a home. People say that, and then they end up, maybe they end up needing, they're a 2-person assist. They need help with bathing, dressing, feeding, grooming. They need total care. And their loved one, number one, can't quit work to stay home with them and do all this. Number two, is not trained. They're not a CNA. They don't know, they don't have the training to do this. So they're going to hurt you or they're going to hurt themselves. And the tremendous level of guilt that puts on the loved one when they have to do it. They have to have you move somewhere for your safety, for your care, and for themselves, because they have to work. They can't provide 24/7 care at home. It's just tremendous. And I think people, particularly older adults right now, who grew up when there was like the county home, the one skilled nursing, and it was not a good place to go, they have a tremendous fear of moving anywhere like that because they think that's all there is. That's in their mind, that's where you'd be putting them. And there's so many more options now. There's so many different levels of care. Are there not great places? Yes. But there's so many that are actually really good. So making those kinds of like blanket promises to your loved one, or trying to get your loved one to make that kind of blanket promise, is really unfair and really backs people into a corner that they don't want to be in.
A great place I know of is Sun City. It's a city in Texas. It's a retirement city, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful there. Like, it's so clean. Like, compared to Austin, Dallas, Houston, it's like, whoa, it's like the best place for retirement. Now, I don't want to live there, but if anyone wanted to live there, it's like you live in a 5-star resort. It's not even a nursing home. It's like a hotel. They're huge buildings, and they have little communities with single family homes, single story, all laid out for someone who's going to be older. You brought up a great point where you do have to prepare. You have to say, okay, well, let's plan for this.
Mm-hmm.
But what would someone do? Would they be looking at HSAs? Would they be looking at how much do they need to cover from what Medicaid won't? What are the kind of the finer details that they would have to kind of start to think about, at least initially?
Sure. So if you're doing any sort of retirement planning, like with a financial advisor, anybody like that, you would be having this as part of the conversation with them. Like, in your area, how much does it cost, right? How much does home care cost? How much do assisted livings cost? What the retirement community, wherever you're thinking you might need to go, how much does that cost, so that you can factor that in to your retirement planning. If you already know that you're not going to have that kind of money, then looking at your state and what their Medicaid requirements are, right? Like, what are the income cutoffs and what are the benefits that Medicaid offers in your state, so that you have a sense of, am I going to qualify? Am I not? If I'm not going to qualify, maybe like because I'm just over the income limit, are there things that I could do in terms of estate planning, things like that, that would help me qualify when the time comes? You would talk to an elder law attorney for that. And that can be done as long as you're doing it ahead of time. So, for example, in North Carolina, there is a 3-year look back period for Medicaid qualification in assisted living, and a 5-year look back period for Medicaid qualification in a skilled nursing building. So if I'm going to do that kind of planning, I have to have done it at least 3 years or 5 years, depending on the level of care I'm going into, ahead of time. I have to have done it ahead of time, because if I need that care today and I haven't done that, it's too late now. I can't go do that estate planning to make it work at this point. So this is part of the reason why kind of looking at your situation and thinking ahead really benefits you, because if you've done that kind of planning, then when the time, if you never need the care, then no harm, no foul, right? But if you need the care, having done that planning will make all the difference in whether or not you're going to be able to afford placement in a community. So that's the kind of thing that really, I think people don't realize the kind of power they have over their future if they talk about it and if they plan for it. Because again, we're all so afraid, or I will run into people who go, I'm just never going to be able to afford any of that. And maybe they won't, but they've got to talk to that estate planning attorney. They've got to talk to their retirement planner. They might want to talk to somebody like me. I love it when somebody calls and says, we don't actually need anything right now, but we're just trying to put our plan together. And we want you to help us like look at all the different communities and the pricing so that we have a sense of like what's out there and help us understand the difference between independent and assisted living. That's terrific. Let's do it. That is a very, very small fraction of my phone calls, but that's great because that's what people should be doing rather than just pretending it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And if we can increase that fraction to be a larger percentage, I think people are going to be even in a better situation later on. So
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
definitely a call to action for people to say, you know what? Let me not wait anymore. And I know it's scary. I know it's daunting, to experience this because it's something that you don't want to experience right now. You want to go out and party and drink and hang out with your friends and go skydiving. And you can do all these things later on when you're older, but it's almost like the mind becomes limited, and it is not. It is boundless. So you can choose to live within those constraints, or you can choose to live beyond them. And if you can plan, and this is why it's good to invest, it's good to look at your retirement and stuff. Not so much of just living day to day and living a YOLO lifestyle. I don't care if the kids use that word anymore, but you only live once, yes, but it doesn't mean that you have to live in poverty later on because you decided to live in luxury today. So I encourage people to plan for their life ahead and don't wait until things get bad, until you have no other option but to look at it. So as we begin to wrap up, Corinne, I would love for you to give us some final words and then for you to tell the audience where they can find you, reach out, and then, of course, give you that call before they even need help.
Sure. I mean, my final thought is, there is so much to look forward to about growing older, and the path to, if you have a negative perception right now, the path forward is to start challenging your own ageist beliefs. Pick up my book, pick up other books about aging that will help you rethink, will help you examine and rethink how you are thinking about your own aging, because this positive attitude we've been talking about, that's an inside job. And that's the place to start. You can find me at my website, which is just my name, CorinneAuman.com. And there you'll find links to the book and podcasts and everything about me. And you can get in touch there if you want to as well.
Perfect. And I'll make it easy for everyone. All the links are just right down below. So you can check out the book, check out her website, reach out to her to begin that planning, not maybe only for yourself, but maybe for your parents, because maybe they're in their 40s or 50s and you might think, oh, we have time. Take action. It's very similar to investing. Yeah, I'm sure everyone wanted to get in Bitcoin in 2018. We're in 2025, essentially. So, that time has already gone and, come and gone. So don't wait until the opportunity is finally away from you. Take hold of your story of aging today. And I do want to thank you, Corinne, for coming on, spending some time, and also talking about your work today.
Thank you for having me.